Let's talk about fetishes in rats. More precisely, jacket fetishes in rats. But first, the Oxford Language Dictionary defines a fetish as a form of sexual desire in which gratification is linked to an abnormal degree to a particular object, item of clothing, part of the body, etc. And if you want to know why or how humans do something, it is often good to look at that behavior in another closely related animal. Because there, we can do all sorts of experiments in a much shorter time, while hopefully still uncovering the main principle that hopefully also applies to humans and other animals. So in this series of papers that I will present, the researchers used rats to test hypotheses about fetish formation. The classical view of how fetishes arise is that it's mostly due to association and Pavlovian classical conditioning, and that this happens during puberty or even childhood. The first two papers specifically ask whether rats can form something like a fetish to wearing a jacket, like if you can see in this picture, even as adults. Therefore, the scientists divided 40 rats evenly into jacket-off or jacket-on rats. Both treatment groups then had sex with different females on 9 days, with some rest in between the days. The jacket-on rats were always dressed in the jacket for the event, but then were naked for the rest of the time when they were in their normal cages. Then in the test trial, these groups were split again, so that half of the jacket-off rats were now wearing the jacket for the first time, while having access to the female, and half of the jacket-on rats were again wearing it, but the other half now didn't. The researchers recorded data on how much they anticipated the copulation, the frequency of intromission and ejaculation, and the time it took the rats to ejaculate the first time. In these plots, the rats trained without the jackets are still grouped on the left, and the jacket-on rats on the right, and the black and white bars will be whether they wore one or not in the test trial respectively. And here's what they found. The rats that were trained while not wearing the jacket showed no difference in any measured factor whether they were wearing a jacket in the first trial or not. However, if they had only had sex in the jacket before and they didn't have it on then in the test trial, they showed less anticipation. But even though they intromit slightly more often, they ejaculate less often and take vastly longer until their first ejaculation, and arguably that's really what counts, at least for evolution. So the conclusion for this paper is that yes, male adult rats can quickly be trained to develop a fetish for wearing a jacket through classical conditioning, because it took them much longer to ejaculate. But what if the partner is wearing a jacket, you may ask? Does that also work? And that's what this next paper answers. Here the authors tested both males and females with pretty much the same methods as in the first paper, but this time not the rat that is being tested wears the outfit, but the individual that it is mating with. And instead of a simple test with one partner, here the test subjects have a choice between one potential partner that wears a jacket and another in the same cage that doesn't wear a jacket. The results are that males preferred females of the same treatment that they were trained on, relatively unsurprisingly, but they also mated with the other female, because why not? Comparing the times until the first ejaculation again, we see that if the males were trained on a fashionable female and then mated with a naked female, they again take longer. But also, if males that never saw the jacket before mounted a female with a jacket, they also take longer until their first ejaculation. So in this case, the jacket was maybe a bit of a turn-off. Females, on the other hand, did not prefer either of the males. But the authors have the hypothesis that this is because the lady rats didn't really feel or see the jacket during copulation, so they couldn't really build a strong association. Now we want to go a step further and know how fetishes are formed in the brain. Of course, we don't know a lot about the brain in general, and the expectations should be low therefore. But these last two papers are at least a start. In this one, the authors placed some male rats into a special cage and then shot them up with morphine, which is an opiate. And after a while, they transferred them back to the normal cage. The rats then quickly associate that drug cage with the euphoria they get from the morphine, And when they then have access to a receptive female in that cage, they also are much quicker to ejaculate than when they meet this female in the normal cage, where they don't associate this with the high of the morphine. So that tells us that this effect might have something to do with the opioid system in the brain. The authors of this more recent paper did again that training and testing trials with the fetish jackets and also with an odor, because that also works really well. That's like having a fetish for a certain perfume or so, I guess. But this time they blocked the opiate receptors in two different parts of the brain with a chemical. And these two areas are the ventral tegmental area and the medial preoptic area. And both of those areas can also be found in human brains. And when they block these receptors in the VTA, the association between the odor and successful copulation goes away, so they don't form this fetish at all. And if the opiate system in the MPOA is blocked, the preference is even inverted, so that the male rats now are seeking the novel female that they haven't seen before, instead of the one wearing their fetish, or not. The team conclude that the opioid activation in the VTA modulates the incentive value for reward-related cues, so it's not really sexually specific, but the opioid activation in the MPOA produces the sexual reward state. Summing all this up, we can say that rats may be a good model for a fetish development in mammals, and we can use them to study this issue further. That is because one can use classical conditioning to make male and female rats develop sexual preference for pretty arbitrary things, and the fetish is pretty clear in males because they take much longer to ejaculate when they don't have their fetish, which also fits the clinical definition. We also know that different brain areas for reward and anticipation act together to form these associations, and that at least the opioid pathway is involved. So who knows, maybe with this research we can one day develop treatments for unhealthy and unhelpful things that humans just do.